This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. This is flyer number 354 in 2 parts, entitled "How Will Widespread Masculism Affect Women?" Description. This flyer tries to imagine what life will be like in a culture in which masculist ideas are as widely known as feminist ideas, and how that state of affairs will impact on women. It lists 10 such ways and elaborates on them. The flyer itself, make it a bit bigger. Okay, to the top. How will widespread masculism affect women? By Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer poses the question: how will widespread masculism, a few years from now, affect women? It imagines that masculism has become as well known in Western countries as feminism, that most men and most women are familiar with masculist arguments, and wonders how such knowledge will impact on women. What will it be like to live in a culture where there is an equal amount of masculist consciousness as feminist consciousness? In today's world, 2020, we live in a largely monoconscious world, that is, in which there is really only one, brackets, gender political, consciousness, that is, feminist. And this lopsidedness, this unipolarity, creates a gender bias, causing women and many men to think that gender politics and gender oppression is a one-way street. To a masculist, this idea that gender oppression is a one-way street, namely by men against women, that is, it is the men who are the oppressors of women, is obviously, to him, biased and ignorant. So what will it be like to live in a culture where masculist knowledge is taken for granted, that everyone, male and female, knows about? This flyer imagines what it will be like to live in such a culture. In the year 2020, this future bi-conscious scenario may seem like a bit of social fiction, but the power of the internet is so great and ideas travel so fast across the planet that it's quite possible that what started off as a social speculation in the mind of one person, if it is sufficiently vivid, can spread like a virus in the minds of millions within only a few years. Hopefully, this is what will happen with the masculist message. Before listing ways in which women will be impacted by widespread masculism, it needs to be said that it's certain that masculism will spread throughout the culture, that this spread is not just a probability. It's a certainty, because the fluffy feminists and all their massive hypocrisy have taken over the divorce courts and are now financially massacring and destroying the lives of a quarter of fathers. Now in capital letters for strong emphasis. No culture that destroys the lives of a quarter of its fathers can remain intact, with 2 exclamation marks. If things don't change, there'll be a sex war. Responsible males, masculist soldiers, will not tolerate that the fluffy feminists indirectly wipe out whole populations, as they're currently doing. In South Korea now, the birth rate is now under 1 child per woman, because Korean men see marriage as such a shitty deal for men that they are rejecting it in their millions. They see marriage as toxic because they see divorce as toxic, as created by the hated, by masculists that is, fluffy feminists who behave as feminists pushing for equal rights and opportunities in the parliaments. but acting as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, abusing and robbing men of their finances to pay for fluffy parasite mothers who have not bothered to FIP up, that is, become financially independent persons, by bothering to get a career-competent education that allows them to become responsible FIPs as adults, and not expecting to parasite off the money and labour of a man. It's inevitable that soon the attention of the media will be drawn to the masculist cause as men continue to boycott marriage and paternity in ever-increasing numbers, as the Masculists, that's men's libbers, and MGTOWs, men going their own way, who reject marriage, paternity and spend their money on themselves, as now the majority of young South Korean men do. In many Western countries now, 2/3 of young men reject marriage, telling their male friends, "Don't marry, don't have kids, don't be a fool, don't take the 1 in 4 risk of being financially massacred in a hated, fluffy feminist dominated divorce court system, which sees you simply as a cash machine to pay for women to have babies." It's only a question of time before, perhaps only a few years at most, before the world's media strongly takes up the masculist message and becomes conscious that the fluffy feminist takeover of the divorce courts is indirectly wiping out whole populations, which is obviously something that has to be stopped. But how? It's then a small step for the media people to start asking the masculists how to solve the paternity rejection problem. All this has to happen. It is a certainty. It's only a question of time. When, not if. Until the gender laws on men fair, for example, divorce is made fair to men, the para-paternity rejection right is legislated, etc., then young men will continue to boycott marriage, seeing it as such a shitty deal for men that they avoid it like the plague, forcing young women to be babyless and thus crashing the population. I predict that the above reasoning on the part of young men in many Western countries will be common knowledge within 3 to 5 years, spread by journalists and the mass media, so that everyone knows about it, so that the gender politicians start thinking about the problem. In Japan, for example, there's even a minister, a senior politician, in charge of population policy. The Japs are not known for their creativity, so the first such population minister simply pressured young men to man up, instead of looking at the population crash through masculist eyes. That is, he failed to get to the heart of why young men are rejecting marriage and paternity in such large numbers. Motivating young men to marry and have kids again will only happen once the gender laws have been man-faired. And for that to happen, fundamental changes need to take place in society that this flyer talks about. Social values and customs will need to change, so that it is safe for men to marry and be fathers again. And that's not going to happen if the gender status quo remains intact. Things have to change, or we wipe ourselves out. With the birth rate in South Korea at now less than 1 child per woman, means that the population is halved per generation. So in just a few generations, there will be no more Koreans, with similar logic applying to many other countries, but not quite as fast, but following the same population trajectory. I begin now to list ways in which women will be impacted by the rise of masculist ideas in the media, in society, in schools, in private conversations, etc. This is a big question that is worthy of some PhD student in men's studies to tackle. I'm merely scratching the surface of the changes that will occur in women as masculism spreads. My off the top of my head suggestions below, that I first put in bulleted form, are just the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully will be enough to get the ball rolling, so that a few years from now some real-life research student or professor does write a book on the question. Here's my list in bulleted form. 1. Women lose their monocultured arrogance and moralistic attitude towards men. 2. Women suffer an increased inferiority complex. 3. Women feel enormous moral pressure to FIP up. 4. STEM field enrollments at high school skyrocket. 5. Gender laws get men fared. 6. Monoconscious feminists largely die out, seen as bigots. 7. Masculist groups get set up in every high school and campus. 8. Male primary school teachers are paid a hefty premium. 9. Feminazis are routinely harangued in public. 10. Boys, men, hit back vociferously at feminazis. This list was made off the top of my head. There are almost certainly many other items one could put in this list, but hopefully the above list will be sufficient to motivate readers to think of other items. This is a huge topic. I now elaborate on each of the above items. 1. Women lose their monocultured arrogance and moralistic attitude towards men. Nearly all feminists today, 2020, are monocultured. That is, they are only aware of feminist, in brackets, gender political, ideas, and know nothing about masculism, about how women oppress men with their financial parasitism, their man-slavery, etc. This monoculturedness of women generates the feeling in them that gender oppression is a one-way street, that makes women angry at men, since women believe that only men are gender oppressors. So women feel morally superior to men, looking down on men as immoral inferiors, to be treated as such, hence the unconscious arrogance of young women who have been taught monocultured feminism all their young lives. Once society becomes as familiar with masculist ideas as feminist ideas, this monoconscious moral superiority on the part of women will disappear as women learn to become bi-conscious or risk being harangued by angry masculists. See items 6, 9 and 10. 2. Women suffer an increased inferiority complex. As masculist ideas spread, masculist scientists, like myself, will teach women that at the top end of the performance scale, women cannot compete with men, that men have a 4 IQ point higher average IQ than women, a 10% higher IQ variance, which explains why men have won 99% of the Science Nobel Prizes, that women have 10% smaller brains, etc. This knowledge will sober women's feminist-based delusions that women are men's equals. Women, like blacks, will simply have to accept their inferior status relative to white males. Bi-conscious women will not be able to argue against science, unless with better science, since science is the best knowledge generating system that men have ever invented. And this is the end of part 1.